Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Define Disaster. This is Battlefield 4. Today we're going to be taking a close look at all available attachments in the game by exploring their function, purpose, and ideal usage in a little more detail. I'm excited to get started with this attachment guide, but before we do, quick shout out to Bombatron and Quid as Sidit for the video suggestion, topic suggestion. Thank you very much, guys. As per usual, if you guys out there have any ideas for video suggestion, things you would like to see on this channel, feel free to leave those down below in the comments. But without any further ado, let's get started with the first attachment. So let's start off with the Suppressor, probably one of the most frequently used attachments in Battlefield 4. Now, let's start with the effects of the Suppressor, and they're pretty obviously and probably known to most of you out there. It obviously silences your weapon, it decreases the sound that your weapon outputs. It doesn't completely eliminate it, but it does decrease it, so it may be harder for players playing with good headphones to locate you. It also obviously stops you from showing up on the minimap when you fire your gun, the biggest advantage of the Suppressor, but it also has negative effects that you should consider when equipping the Suppressor. And the Suppressor, for obvious reasons, actually has some of the largest negative effects of all attachments we'll be talking about today. First of all, it drops your muzzle velocity quite significantly, roughly to around 300 meters per second. Now, it obviously depends on the weapon you're using. This varies from weapon to weapon, but you can estimate it or expect it to be around the ballpark of 300 meters per second. Now, I personally don't find this to be too much of a big deal. The only situation where this could be difficult is if you're using the Suppressor at long range to shoot at a moving target. In this case, you're going to have to lead your gun more, so obviously don't put a Suppressor on a sniper rifle. That's pretty obvious, but otherwise, if you're using it in close quarter, which is where the Suppressor helps most, this isn't really very important. Now, there's another kind of negative trait that comes with it, at least officially, and that is 20% more hipfire spread while not moving. Now, this is completely irrelevant. First of all, because 20% hipfire spread increase isn't a big deal, but second of all, while not moving. I don't know how many players actually hipfire their gun while standing still. If you can stand still and fire at a target, you should be aiming down sight. Anyway, you should not be hip firing. If you're hip firing, you're in close quarter where your spread doesn't very much matter, and you should be moving about to make yourself a harder target. So with that being said, there you go. That's what a suppressor is used for. Obviously, suppressors are great for kind of flanking your enemy or for TDM style game modes where you're in close quarter a lot and you don't want the entire enemy team just diverging on your position as soon as you fire a single shot. The next attachment we're looking at is the flash hider. It basically reduces your muzzle flash, making it harder for enemies to spot you through the smoke or on darker maps. It has a negative trait that allows it kind of slower spread decrease on your gun, that is ADS, so aiming down sight, of 17%. But as we're going to get into later, these ADS decrease or spread decrease values are in 90% of the situations completely irrelevant. You won't actually realize that you're having kind of a worse accuracy with your gun because the effects are so minimal. And especially when we're talking about 17%, I can guarantee you this is not going to affect the performance of your weapon, even if you're bursting as fast and as frequently as you can. Moving on next to the heavy barrel. Now, the heavy barrel is an interesting attachment. Its base effects basically are 50% less minimum spread, which means if you have an accuracy of 0.2, an ADS value of 0.2 like you have on most assault rifles, the heavy barrel will actually mean that you have a value of 0.1 when starting to fire. It also slightly decreases your spread increase per shot by 7.5%, but that is such a little increase, it's absolutely irrelevant, and it decreases the penalty of moving while shooting by 16.7%. Again, not really relevant. It's not really going to make a big difference to your performance. What is going to make your difference to performance, though, is the 30% increase to vertical recoil, and that is quite hefty. If we were to say, look at the FAMAS, probably the worst gun to put a heavy barrel on in the entire game, this would mean that you would go from 0.6 degrees vertical recoil per shot to 0.8. That is obviously a massive difference, and I would only really advise using something like a heavy barrel on either a gun that you actually have difficulties with the base accuracy, and not the recoil of the gun, but the actual accuracy of the gun while firing it, or on things like DMRs or heavier pistols where you are single firing each shot and have enough time to let the gun come to a complete standstill and don't have to really account for much recoil. 30% more vertical recoil is something that you should not kind of just ignore. Some players like to use it on assault rifles. Frankly, I don't see a reason why, for example, you would run around with an Ace 23 with a heavy barrel. 0.2 degrees for an ADS value is not something difficult to control or that will actually hamper your performance. So my take on the heavy barrel is really an attachment for DMRs if you want a specific gun to use them on. The next attachment, the Compensator, is something you see on a lot of guns which are used for close quarter combat. Basically what the Compensator does, it decreases horizontal recoil by 25%, which means if you have a gun that shakes side to side very violently, this will help to control this. On the other hand, you have a 30% higher increase per spread per shot. Now, this may seem like not very important for something like an AK in close quarter, and you would be correct there. However, if you are using something like an AR-160 SAR 21, frankly, you don't really need a compensator anyway, but say you were to use one, these are long distance engagement rifles, and you should not be increasing your spread on guns like that. So I would not really recommend the compensator for anything other than close quarter weapons if you have trouble with horizontal recoil. To give an example of a gun that very much benefits from a compensator, I would recommend trying out the F2000. Now, probably the most frequently used attachment for barrels in Battlefield 4 is the muzzle brake, and it's actually kind of overstated how much this helps. I thought the muzzle brake was actually more of a significant factor in helping to control vertical recoil than it actually is if you look up the stats. It decreases your vertical recoil by only 10%. This is quite low. Now it can help on guns like the AEK or the FAMAS because their vertical recoil is just so very high, but on guns that have medium to lower vertical recoils, it's not actually worth using a muzzle brake because it will increase your spread per shot by 12.5%. On the other hand, 12.5% is not really much either. So the muzzle brake is kind of an attachment that doesn't really change the way your gun functions too much. It is to be recommended though for close quarter weaponry, much like the compensator. Now, before we move on to the next attachment, I wanted to mention why I am claiming that the muzzle brake reduces the vertical recoil by 10% versus the 25% you will find in Battlelog. And that is because I use data from symthic.com, which regularly updates it and gets it from the actual game files. Battlelog has a history of not updating the actual stats of attachments or guns regularly, and this is why it's kind of out to date. Furthermore, I did a test myself to see, well, maybe Symthic got it wrong, but actually, as you can see here on the spray patterns you're seeing right now, the two left are with the compensator, the two on the right are without any barrel attachment whatsoever. There's hardly a difference, which points more towards the 10% recoil reduction than the actual 25 claimed by Battlelog. The next attachment, the laser sight, is actually pretty interesting. We'll get into why in just a second. Inherently, it doesn't actually have any disadvantage. It only kind of helps you fire more accurately while hip firing. Obviously, it's a laser sight. Now, what specifically it does is it decreases the minimum hipfire spread by 33%. Now this can be quite significant because you have to remember that hipfire values, even on the best hipfire guns, which are PDWs, are relatively high. If you're looking at an assault rifle, we're talking about values of 3.25 or 3.5. Decreasing that by 33% gets you into an area of 0.2 to 0.25, which is almost as accurate as actually ADS. So that's quite important to consider. Now obviously you have also hipfire spread, which is a lot larger than when actually ADSing, so that's to consider. But what are the actual disadvantages of using a laser sight? Well, it can be seen. You can actually be spotted more easily with a laser sight, especially on dark maps or maps full of smoke. You've surely already encountered somebody using a laser sight the other side of a smoke grenade. You immediately spot them and shoot them in the face. You may get a raging comment in the chat, how the hell did you know I was there, if he's got no idea that he's got a laser sight in his gun. But otherwise, that's basically the disadvantage of a laser sight. However, if you can train yourself to actually turn off your laser sight when you encounter a situation where you think it may actually hurt you more than actually benefit you, the prime example being a rush game mode full of smoke, then this laser sight only really has positive aspects because it just helps you hip fire in close quarter, which can be a very effective way to kill your enemy. Obviously, you do not have to wait for your sights to come up, which takes time, and you have a better kind of view of the situation going around you. So if he starts jumping about like a clown, you can more easily follow him with your shots. Moving on then to the angled foregrip and the folding grip. Twice the same thing, just two different names. They have the same effects, and those are 20% less first shot recoil addition and 34% slower spread decrease. Now the first is obviously the benefit. It allows you to better tap fire on weapons which have quite hefty first shot recoil and first shot recoil multipliers. It's less useful obviously on weapons that don't have such high first shot recoil multipliers. Thus I would recommend putting either on weapons that you tap fire a lot or on weapons like the AEK or FAMAS, which have just these very high first shot recoil multipliers. Now the 34% slower spread decrease sounds quite hefty, quite bad, but in reality it isn't actually a big deal. And to kind of illustrate this, I looked at one of the worst guns when it comes to both spread increase and time for the spread to go back to normal in the game, and that is the AEK 971. If you were to fight, say, 10 bullets without tap firing, basically 10 bullets right out of the mag without stopping, you would arrive at an accuracy ADS value of 0.317 when you started at your usual 0.2. If you're using something like an angled foregrip, you would be at a value of 0.352, so just over 0.035 higher. That is truly not a lot, and obviously you're not usually going to be firing 10 shot bursts with, say, just a few milliseconds difference in time in between. Spread decreases very, very quickly in guns in Battlefield 4. Even on the AEK, you've got something like 7.5, 7.7 degrees per second. There is, however, a video out there which explains this much better than I do and actually does kind of some practical tests to illustrate my point, and the point that this higher amount of spread decrease given by the angled grip and folding grip is not a big deal, and I will be linking that down below in the description of this video. It's a video by Harry Does Gaming, and he does a great job at explaining just what I attempted to. Moving on then next to the Ergo grip and the vertical grip. These are obviously different from the angled and folding grip, and their effects are 50% less minimum spread while moving both hipfire and ADS, and 34% slower spread decrease once more. We covered the later already, not really relevant in most situations. However, the first is a great addition or great benefit to your gun if you're somebody who strafes a lot. Not only does this help you hip fire, but it also helps you kind of your accuracy while strafing. Now this is important if you're using guns at longer range or at close range. It doesn't really matter. Most players, without actually noticing, strafe when firing at a target, especially when obviously fighting a sniper at longer range. And this grip heavily impacts your accuracy for the better with a 50% less minimum spread while moving. This will massively increase or help your accuracy while moving, and that's why I like to, or increasingly am, running most of my guns with an Ergo or vertical grip. One of the last grips we're going to be looking at today are the Potato and Stubby grip. These are kind of different from the Ergo and vertical grip once more, and they do the following: 20% less spread increase per shot and 33% less ADS max spread with the same minus 34 or 34% slower spread decrease. These grips, or these two grips, are kind of useless because 20% less spread increase per shot is going to help slightly, but we did see here we're talking about a spread increase per shot of maybe 0.12 with 10 bullets out of the AEK, so you would be at a spread increase of, say, 1 or 0.9 instead. That's not going to really help you that much. There may be certain situations where it will, maybe something like an MG4 when you're back raging 100 people and you're just going to hold down that trigger for a good 10 seconds, roll out 50, 100 bullets, the whole mag out of your gun without ever letting off the trigger. Then something like a Potato Stubby grip may be useful, so not really that many uses for it. The 33% less ADS max spread is absolutely irrelevant. If you are at your max value of ADS spread for your gun, you've been firing that gun way too long and your bullets are going to be going anywhere but actually on the target. Last but not least, then we have the Bipod. Now the Bipod has 1,000,002,002 effects. It's actually a huge list of different things it does, but basically, to summarize them all, it turns your gun into a laser weapon. It just makes all the recoil basically disappear, all the spread. It basically makes your gun shoot extremely accurate at whatever target you are firing at. There is, however, of course, a downside to this, and that is that you have to set up the Bipod. Just running it on as normal grip without actually kind of setting it up isn't going to have any effect on the gun, then you're missing out on an opportunity to use something like an Ergo and vertical grip there. Once it's set up, obviously it is awesome. However, you become very vulnerable to, first of all, accurate players kind of flanking you, to grenades, and of course snipers, because those can often take you out before you've had actually time to demount your bipod and get the hell out of there. There are 2 more attachments that I have left out, and I thought I'd cover them real quick, and that is the rangefinder. It basically shows you the range you're shooting at, and that's basically useful for mostly sniper rifles and DMRs, but can be put onto things like carbines as well. You may want to use it, you may not. It replaces the laser sight. If you're somebody who doesn't want to use the laser sight, it doesn't really have any downsides using it other than occupying that additional gadget slot that you otherwise would have. Then of course we have the flashlight. This basically allows you to, well, blind enemies in close quarter. I personally just find it to provide a beacon of light telling everybody on the enemy team where I am. So I would definitely not recommend using the flashlight. I don't find it to be very useful. Now, there is also one more to talk about, and that would be the target detector. Now, frankly, I used to slap this on to my guns when I didn't want to use a laser sight or didn't have it unlocked yet. But unless you've got really bad eyesight and you have difficulty spotting enemies, then there's no really reason to use it. You're always more likely to spot your enemy than the target detector actually will. It's not very good at spotting kind of enemies hiding behind foliage or just head glitching or something like that. Your personal human eye is much better at finding them. So again, an attachment with very little use in practical terms. Now, with that being said, we've covered all the attachments as far as I know, at least. Let me know what you thought about my analysis of the attachment. This has been a relatively long video, and I tried to get through it all as soon and as quickly as possible. There is plenty more to be said, and if you have questions, feel free to leave those down below in the comments, as well as your video or topic suggestions, of course. But otherwise, I hope you have enjoyed and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 4 video.